The boot connected with her shoulder, sending her sprawling face first into the dusty street. Coins scattered from her torn apron, 3 pennies and a bent nickel, everything she had left in the world. "On your knees," the voice above her commanded. "Beg proper, like the worthless thing you are." Evangeline pressed her palms against the hard-packed earth, tasting blood where her teeth had cut her lip. Around her, the good people of Millbrook had stopped to watch, some with pity, most with the sick fascination of those who'd never fallen quite so far. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on her bent back, and she could feel sweat mixing with tears on her dirt-stained cheeks. "Please," she whispered, hating herself for the word even as it left her lips. "I just need enough for bread. My daughter, your daughter, ain't my concern." Clayton Marsh towered over her, his expensive boots inches from her face. The banker's son had always been cruel, but losing 3 poker hands to her late husband had turned cruelty into something deeper, more personal. "You got debts to pay, woman. Your husband's gambling debts become your debts when he goes and gets himself shot." Evangeline had been a teacher once before Samuel's drinking and gambling destroyed everything they'd built. Before the fever took him and left her with nothing but his sins and a 6-year-old daughter who asked why Mama cried so much. "I'll get the money," she said, her voice barely audible. "Just give me more time." "Time's up." Clayton grabbed a fistful of her dark hair, yanking her head back so the whole street could see her humiliation. "Maybe a few days begging in the dirt will teach you respect." That's when the shadow fell across them both. Evangeline looked up to see a man on horseback, tall, broad-shouldered, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent his life under open skies. His hat was pulled low, but she could see his eyes, cold as winter water, fixed on Clayton with the kind of attention a wolf gives a wounded deer. "Let her go." The cowboy's voice was quiet, conversational, but it carried across the street like thunder. Clayton's grip on her hair tightened. "This ain't your business, stranger." The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs singing against the boardwalk. When his boots hit the ground, Evangeline felt the earth itself seem to hold its breath. "I'm making it my business." Clayton released Evangeline's hair and straightened to his full height, which still left him looking up at the stranger. "You don't know what you're walking into here, cowboy. This woman owes money, legitimate debts her dead husband left behind." The stranger's hand rested easy on his gun belt, not threatening, just present. "What I see is a man forcing a woman to grovel in the dirt for sport. What you see," Clayton's voice rose with indignation, "is justice being served. Samuel Hartwell owed me $200 when he died. Now his widow pays one way or another." Around them the crowd had grown. Evangeline recognized most of the faces, people who'd once nodded respectfully when she passed, who'd trusted her to teach their children. Now they watched her humiliation with the hungry eyes of spectators at a hanging. Mrs. Abernathy from the dress shop whispered something to her companion, shaking her head in disapproval. Whether that disapproval was aimed at Evangeline's predicament or the cowboy's interference wasn't clear. $200, the stranger repeated, as if tasting the words. "That what a woman's dignity is worth in this town." Clayton's face flushed red. Her dignity was lost the day she married a drunk and a cheat. "I'm just collecting what's owed." The cowboy reached into his vest pocket, and Clayton instinctively stepped back. But instead of a weapon, the stranger produced a worn leather wallet. He counted out bills, crisp 20s and 10s, until a small fortune lay in his calloused palm. "There's your 200, he said, extending the money toward Clayton, "plus 50 for interest. We're done here." Evangeline's heart lurched. She'd never seen so much money in one place, certainly never had a stranger offer to pay her debts. The gesture was so unexpected, so impossibly generous, that she couldn't quite believe it was real. Clayton stared at the bills like they might bite him. "What's your game, mister? Nobody pays a stranger's debts out of the goodness of their heart. Maybe I just don't like seeing women treated like dogs. And maybe you're fixing to collect that debt yourself private-like." Clayton's smile was ugly, knowing that it, "Cowboy, you want her for your own purposes." The stranger's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air around him, a coldness that made even the watching crowd take a collective step back. Before he could respond, the thunderous sound of multiple horses filled the street. 6 riders appeared at the far end of town, moving at a gallop, dust boiling up behind them like storm clouds. Clayton's smile widened. Well, now looks like the sheriff's back from Dodge City. Perfect timing. Evangeline's blood turned to ice. Sheriff Morrison was Clayton's uncle, and everyone in Millbrook knew whose side the law would take. Sheriff Morrison and his deputies thundered into the main street like an army returning from war, their horses lathered with sweat and foam. The star on Morrison's vest caught the sunlight as he reined his mount to a hard stop, his cold eyes immediately finding his nephew's face. Clayton, Morrison's voice carried the authority of 15 years wearing a badge. Heard there was trouble brewing. The cowboy hadn't moved, but Evangeline noticed his thumb hook casually over his gun belt, a subtle shift that spoke of a man preparing for violence. Around them the crowd pressed closer, sensing that whatever was about to unfold would be worth witnessing. "Uncle Dale," Clayton said, his confidence returning with reinforcements at his back. "This stranger, he has been interfering with legitimate debt collection, making threats, disturbing the peace." Morrison's gaze settled on the cowboy with the weight of a man accustomed to sizing up trouble. "That true, mister? You threatening citizens in my town?" "Just paying a debt," the cowboy replied evenly. $250 to settle this woman's account. No threats necessary. Mighty generous of you." Morrison dismounted, his spurs jangling against the packed earth. "Course I got to wonder what a drifter's doing with that kind of money. You wouldn't happen to match the description of a man who robbed the First Bank of Dodge City 3 days ago, would you?" The accusation hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Evangeline felt her heart sink as she realized the trap closing around her unlikely savior. Clayton's smile spread across his face like spilled oil, ugly and staining everything it touched. "Now that you mention it, Uncle Dale, he does look familiar. Dark hair, tall, riding a bay gelding with 3 white socks." Clayton's voice dripped with false concern. "Same horse described in that telegram we got yesterday." Evangeline looked at the cowboy's mount and felt her stomach drop. 3 white socks, exactly as Clayton had described. The cowboy's expression never changed, but she saw his hand drift closer to his Colt. 6 lawmen against 1 man. The mathematics of it was simple and brutal. "I think," Morrison said, drawing his own weapon with deliberate slowness, "we need to have ourselves a conversation down at the jail. You can explain where you got that money, and we can sort out whether you're the good Samaritan you claim to be, or just another road agent with a guilty conscience." The street had gone dead silent, except for the creak of leather and the nervous shifting of horses. Evangeline realized with crystal clarity that her salvation was about to become her savior's destruction. Unless she did something about it, Evangeline pushed herself up from the dust, her legs trembling but her voice steady for the first time in months. "Sheriff Morrison, you're making a mistake." Morrison's gun never wavered from the cowboy. "Stay out of this, Mrs. Hartwell. You got enough troubles of your own. This man was with me 3 days ago." The lie came easier than any truth she'd ever told. "Here in Millbrook, helping me move my daughter's things from the schoolhouse. Ask anybody who was there." Clayton's face twisted with rage. "That's impossible. You're lying to protect him." "Am I?" Evangeline stepped closer to the cowboy, close enough to smell leather and sage, and something else, something clean and honest that reminded her of the man she'd married before whiskey poisoned him. "Mr. Cole," the cowboy said quietly, his eyes never leaving Morrison's gun. "Daniel Cole. Mr. Cole helped me carry my daughter's desk from the schoolhouse to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house. Spent the better part of an hour doing it too, on account of how heavy that old oak was." Evangeline turned to face the crowd. "Mrs. Patterson, you remember, don't you? How kind Mr. Cole was to little Mary, letting her ride his horse while we worked." Mrs. Patterson, a widow who ran the only boarding house in town, stepped forward uncertainly. The old woman's eyes flicked between Morrison's stern face and Evangeline's desperate one. "Well, I suppose I do recall." "You recall what exactly?" Morrison's voice carried a warning. Mrs. Patterson straightened her spine. I recall a gentleman helping Mrs. Hartwell with that desk. Nice man, gentle with the child. Wouldn't take payment for his trouble, either. Cole turned to look at Evangeline, and in his eyes she saw something that took her breath away. Not gratitude, but recognition, as if he understood exactly what she was risking for him, and why. 3 days ago, he said softly, his words meant for her alone.
Oh.
Your daughter was wearing a blue dress with tiny flowers on it. Asked me if my horse had a name. Buttercup, Evangeline whispered, remembering. She wanted to name him Buttercup. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Around them, the crowd shifted restlessly, and Morrison's deputies exchanged uncertain glances. Uncle Dale, Clayton said urgently, you can't seriously believe. A new voice cut through the tension like a blade. Sheriff Morrison. All eyes turned to see a young man in a travel-stained duster riding hard into town, a deputy marshal's badge glinting on his chest. Marshal Collins sent me, the rider called out, pulling his lathered horse to a stop. We got the Dodge City bank robber, caught him trying to cross into Kansas territory yesterday evening. The silence that followed was deafening. Morrison slowly holstered his weapon, his face flushing red beneath his weathered hat. Clayton's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water, his carefully constructed trap collapsing around him. Well, Morrison said finally, his voice tight with embarrassment, seems we owe you an apology, Mr. Cole. Cole nodded once, but his attention had already shifted to Clayton, who was backing toward the mercantile, with the look of a man who suddenly realized he'd made powerful enemies. About that debt, Cole said, his voice carrying across the street with quieter authority, Mrs. Hartwell's account is settled, permanently. Clayton straightened, trying to salvage some dignity. The money, sure, but there's still the matter of what? Cole stepped forward, and Clayton stumbled backward. The matter of you forcing a woman into the dirt for sport. The matter of you humiliating a widow in front of her neighbors. The crowd had gone completely quiet, sensing that the morning's drama was far from over. I want you to understand something, Cole continued, his voice never rising above conversational level. Mrs. Hartwell is under my protection now. Anyone who troubles her, anyone who so much as speaks harshly to her or her daughter, will answer to me personally. Are we clear? Clayton nodded frantically. All his earlier bluster evaporated. Cole turned back to Evangeline, and when he extended his hand, she took it without hesitation. His palm was calloused from years of hard work, warm and steady and completely certain. Mrs. Hartwell, he said formally, though his eyes held promises that had nothing to do with formality. Would you do me the honor of accompanying me? I believe we have some things to discuss. She looked up at his weathered face, at the kindness in his eyes that she'd almost forgotten existed in the world. My daughter will come with us naturally. A family should stay together. The word family hung in the air between them, full of possibility. Cole helped her onto his horse, settling her sideways in front of him, with a gentleness that spoke of practice with precious things. As they rode toward Mrs. Patterson's boarding house to collect little Mary, Evangeline felt something she hadn't experienced in years, hope. Years later, when Mary was grown and married, when the ranch Cole built had become the largest in 3 counties, when Evangeline's laughter had returned to fill their home with warmth, she would remember this morning, the day a stranger lifted her from the dust and carried her toward a life she'd never dared imagine. The empty street stretched behind them, Clayton's humiliation settling into the dust where it belonged.